These are jungle boots. And they might look like some kind of relatively old, pretty standard looking military boot. But what if I told you that these are not all that normal at all? At that time, these were completely innovative, that they were high tech. I mean, maybe not high tech, but they were packed full of features that were absolutely revolutionary at the time, and they've influenced the way that more or less all military boots are made even to this day. The design was so good that these were used in some way, shape, or form by the US Armed Forces for more than 60 years. From Guam to Grenada to Panama, First Gulf War. Servicemen have been choosing to wear these things way outside of the tropics. And just think about it. One dude's wearing a steel pod helmet and the other's loaded out in Kevlar with night vision and GPS. They're rocking the same boots. Isn't that pretty crazy? So how the hell does a boot with technology from the 40s live through more than 60 years of military and technological advancement? You see, probably the most important tool an infantryman has is his feet. And the boot has been critical to military success for, well, I mean, pretty much ever. They're rugged, they're tough, they protect your feet from the elements, from punctures, cuts, and they support against sprains. Importantly, they give traction, and even more importantly, they help keep water out. And that last bit's really, really important. Because one of the biggest enemies to an infantryman's feet is trench foot or jungle rot. And this is where your feet are wet for so long that they begin to swell, they get infected, and they rot. And it's really not very pretty. It's no laughing matter, in fact. Skin peels away, ulcers begin to form, and flesh begins to rot. In many cases, amputation is the only answer. In both World War I and World War II, it was one of the largest issues affecting all sides. And in many battles, the Siege of Kut, the Battle for Guadalcanal, for example, bad foot health was one of the largest determining factors in who won or lost the entire battle. Basically, if your feet are fucked, well, you're completely out of the fight. So foot hygiene is super important. And boots help keep feet dry. They prevent pretty much all of these issues if they perform well. So you could say that the boot is one of the most important tools in an infantryman's kit out. But what happens in conditions where you just can't keep feet dry? Can't keep feet dry. Say in the tropics where it's just really not feasible to keep water out in many situations. And this is what was discovered in Panama, where an experimental platoon after Pearl Harbor that was patrolling the Panama Canal area quickly realized that their leather footwear was just really not going to cut it. It's not suitable for hot, humid, fungus-ridden jungle conditions. And this is where the idea for a dedicated jungle boot came about. The idea is pretty simple in principle. If you can't stop water getting in, then design a boot that can get the water out and dries really, really fast. And whilst the design that they came up with was relatively simple, the M1942 jungle boots were completely revolutionary at the time. They had a canvas top, not leather, and they had eyelets in the side of the boot that allowed the water to drain out and air to circulate. They were way lighter and they dried way faster than your traditional leather boot. And that combination was huge. It kept feet dry and it stopped tropical ulcers and jungle rot from forming. And ultimately, it kept troops in the fight. They shipped these things all over the Pacific to New Guinea, Philippines, Burma. Where things ended up with this design was outlined in the specification Boot Combat Tropical Mildew Resistant. And I mean, I don't really know. If you ask me, they could have just called this Mildew Resistant Tropical Combat Boot, but I don't really know how these things are done. So let's move on. This initial design was really too late to World War II to really be issued in large numbers, but the design was there and it worked. This pattern, which people often refer to as the Okinawa boot, made it all the way to Vietnam on the feet of American advisors. And while the bones of the design were there for sure, they had quite a few issues. They didn't quite look and feel like the jungle boot we know today, and they didn't quite hold up as well as they would need to in that environment. By 62, things had started to look a little bit more recognizable. A black leather nylon webbed tropical combat boot. And in 65, Welco was awarded the first official large-scale jungle boot contract, and they began producing more than 5,000 pairs per day. These are the M66 jungle boot, and they look largely like what we think of as a jungle boot today. No more double-buckled leather cuff, a black leather toe and counter with a cotton canvas upper. The changes didn't stop there, however. The jungle boot changed and evolved over time, and ultimately there were 3 primary pairs used throughout the Vietnam War. By the time the jungle boot had reached its final form, it was sneaky packed with features. It had nylon reinforcement for the boot's neck, spike protection had been added to the soles, and even the inner soles were pretty innovative. They were made out of a saran plastic that would not absorb any water in their fibers, and they were layered to create a spongy-like structure. This acted as an air pump so that the boot would pump out water and circulate air in, drying themselves just through the act of walking. And they had the re-edition of a 1942 experimental high-traction sole known as the Panama sole. The sole takes principles from rubber tractor tires that had these wide outward-sloping grooves, and this caused mud under pressure to squeeze outward. Ultimately, what you had was a sole that shed mud instead of clogging, and it meant traction on surfaces that no other boot could even stand on without slipping. This, in general, was a really good boot, and it was very popular. It was capable, well-made, probably better than anything else that was available on the market worldwide. Initially, Australian and Kiwi troops that were stationed in Vietnam that were still being issued World War II era entirely black leather GP boots, complete with hobnails for traction, well, they would frequently look to trade their slouch hats just for a pair of jungle boots. The design was really good, and it was really sticky. Some US troops were still being issued green jungle boots in Operation Desert Storm and in Iraqi Freedom. That's 2003. The modern black versions at the time were frequently shunned for the Vietnam era greens, and it wasn't until 2005 that the Marine Corps officially retired the green jungle boot from frontline service. That's more than 60 years of service, and things don't really end there. You're typically going to see echoes of the jungle boot design in just about every military boot today. Typically a rubber sole directly molded into a leather toe and heel cap with a lightweight upper that probably still has a nylon reinforcement that supports from the heel cap to the eyelet, albeit these boots don't really have the self-draining functionality these days. But I think that if you ever really saw the theatre of war return to the tropics, you'd probably see that feature come back too. That's it for this one. Pretty cool boots. I thought it was a fun design and a fun history. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. Goodbye.